Imagine standing at the foot of a huge mountain. Its summit is hidden in the clouds. The snowy slopes glisten in the cold light, and the wind carries with it the scent of ice and silence. Here, at the beginning of the trail, everything seems unattainable and simultaneously alluring. This is Mount Everest. It is dangerous, harsh, and unpredictable. And yet, it is here that thousands of people from all over the world are drawn. For some, it is a dream. For others, a fashion trend. For still others, a desire to test themselves and leave their mark on the roof of the world. Today, its slopes attract both experienced climbers and beginners who want to at least once touch the legend. Today, we will set out on a journey to this peak to learn its history, its secrets, and the destinies of the people who dared to take a step toward the sky. Make yourself comfortable. The road to Everest awaits us. Chapter 1. Everest Today. A symbol of dreams and fashion. Imagine an altitude of over 8,000 meters. The wind is so strong it literally cuts your face. There's so little air that every breath feels like a short struggle for life. And ahead there's a line. Dozens of people stand one behind the other, clinging to a rope, patiently waiting to climb a few steps and take that very photo at the top of the world. In the death zone, you can't linger. There, every breath is like scooping up emptiness. Above 8,000 meters, the oxygen in the air is half what a person needs to survive. There, the body slowly gives up, and doctors say, a person in these conditions dies. But it's there, on the very edge of survival, that lines are forming today. In the spring of 2019, a photograph went around the world. A line of hundreds of people lined up on the narrow path to the summit. Some stood for over 2 hours, others lost their strength and couldn't bear it. For just a few minutes on the summit, people risked their lives. But that didn't stop anyone. A photo on the roof of the world has become one of the most coveted of our time. Why has Everest now become a symbol of dreams and fashion? In the past, only select climbers went there. Today, businessmen, bloggers, adventurers, and even those with little experience climb the mountain, because now the summit is accessible to those willing to pay. A climbing permit costs between $10,000 and $20,000. And with oxygen tanks, tents, food, equipment, and guides, the final price can reach up to $200,000. That's like an apartment in a big city or several expensive cars. And all for the sake of standing on the summit and saying, I was there. Every year, Nepalese authorities issue hundreds of permits. 2 years ago, there were almost 500. This is precisely why traffic jams form near the summit. Only one person can travel along the narrow path, and if the one ahead slows down, the entire line comes to a standstill. And standing still at an altitude above 8,000 meters is a mortal risk. And yet, people go on. After all, Everest has become a brand known to everyone. Its name resonates louder than those of other great mountains, Kanchenjunga or Annapurna. Even those who have never opened a map know that Everest is the highest point on Earth. But behind the fashion, there is another side. The mountain holds hundreds of bodies. Many climbers died, never returning. Their bodies froze right on the slopes, and some of them have become grim landmarks for new climbers. The most famous climber with green boots, who lay by the trail for almost 20 years, was passed by everyone who walked the northern route. It's a reminder. The mountain is unforgiving, and yet its popularity is growing. Today, the summit has been reached by both the youngest climbers, teenagers as young as 14, and the oldest, over 10. There are guides who have climbed it more than 30 times. Every new record immediately becomes news, because the name Everest in itself sounds like a legend. The dream of reaching the summit drives thousands of people. For some, it's a spiritual challenge. For others, prestige. For still others, a photo that will bring likes and followers. And if once the ascent was the work of heroes, today it has become part of global culture. We use the word Everest as a metaphor. We say, "This is my Everest," when we mean the most difficult goal. But here's the paradox. Everest is simultaneously the most famous mountain and one of the most dangerous. Some see it as romantic, others as commercial, still others as a cemetery hidden under the snow. But everyone agrees on one thing. It is a peak that stirs the imagination. When a person stands in line in the death zone, they understand that every moment could be their last, but they don't turn away, because the dream is stronger than fear. And as long as there are people willing to risk everything for a few minutes on the roof of the world, Everest will remain a symbol of our time, a symbol of dreams, and a symbol of fashion. Chapter 2. Kanchenjunga, a legendary mountain. Today, we call it Everest. But for the locals, this peak was never just a geographical marker on a map. For the people of Nepal and Tibet, the mountain bears another name, Kanchenjunga. It sounds soft and majestic, and is translated in various ways. Divine Mother of the World, Holy Mother, or Mistress of the Snows. The name Everest itself only appeared in the 19th century. British cartographers, exploring the Himalayas, debated for a long time how to designate this gigantic peak. They found the local names difficult to pronounce. Ultimately, the mountain was named after Sir George Everest, the chief surveyor of India. The irony is that George Everest himself never saw the mountain and did not want it to bear his name, but the name stuck and became known throughout the world. For locals, the mountain has always been sacred. In Tibetan legends, Kanchenjunga is not just a mountain, but an abode of spirits. Deities, guardians of order and balance, were believed to live on its slopes. In Nepalese legends, the peak is associated with the goddess Mayulang Sungdama, who is considered the patroness of mountains and protector of living beings. Since ancient times, local peoples have treated Kanchenjunga with reverence. Climbing it was considered impudent. The mountain was revered as a shrine, which one could only approach, but not trespass within. Even shepherds tried to circle its foot with respect and made sacrifices to the spirit to receive blessings. In Tibetan and Nepalese legends, the peak was depicted as a place where earth and sky meet. Deities lived there, from where they watched over people. Some stories said the mountain was a gateway to the spirit world, others that it was the Axis Mundi, an invisible pillar that holds up the sky. There are also darker legends. In some tales, the mountain was considered a place where the souls of sinners wander in the cold and winds. This is why the inhabitants tried not to disturb Kanchenjunga unnecessarily. For them, the summit was a living and dangerous force. Even today, despite the tourist rush, many Sherpas begin each ascent with a puja ceremony. They set up stone altars at the foot of the mountain, burn incense, pray, and ask for the blessing of the mountain goddess. They do not set out without this step. For them, the ascent is not only a physical test, but also a spiritual journey that demands respect. Interestingly, the mountain has different names in different languages. In Nepal, it is called Sagarmatha, the forehead of the sky. In Tibet, Kanchenjunga is the divine mother of the world. For the Western world, it remains Everest. And each of these names reflects a part of its essence, sacred grandeur for some, a cold scientific term for others. And therein lies a peculiar paradox. For millions of tourists, Everest is a record and a photo. But for those who live nearby, Kanchenjunga remains sacred. They believe the mountain is alive, that it feels, and that without respect for it, it is impossible to reach the summit. When you stand at the foot and gaze at its white slopes, it becomes clear that the legends were not born by chance. Kanchenjunga truly resembles a goddess. shrouded in clouds, majestic and unattainable. And perhaps that is why everyone who goes there feels not only cold and fatigue, but also awe at the mystery hidden in the heart of this mountain. Chapter 3. Geography and Nature of Everest. Geography and Nature of Everest. Everest rises to a height of 849 meters above sea level. It is the highest point on our planet, and it is this very figure that has made the mountain legendary. When a person stands on its summit, they are closer to heaven than anywhere else on Earth. Everest is part of the Himalayas, the youngest and highest mountain range in the world. These mountains arose relatively recently in geological terms, approximately 50 million years ago, when the Indian plate collided with the Eurasian plate. The continents continue to press against each other today, causing the Himalayas to slowly, but still rise. Scientists say Everest is growing by approximately a few millimeters every year. But the mountain's greatness is measured not only by its height. The climate here is unique and harsh. At the summit, temperatures can drop below -60 degrees Celsius in winter. Even in summer, they rarely rise above -20 degrees Celsius. The wind blows at speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour. Sometimes it is so strong that it literally rips tents off and knocks people off their feet. Everest is shrouded in glaciers. There are more than 50 of them. The most famous is the Khumbu Icefall, called the Ice Labyrinth. It is a moving river of ice, where crevasses open suddenly, and blocks the size of buildings can collapse without warning. Every step there is a game of time and fate. The air at high altitude is another danger. At 8,000 meters, there is half the oxygen needed by the human body. This condition is called hypoxia, oxygen starvation. The heart beats faster, breathing becomes heavy, and the head spins. A person cannot remain in such conditions for long. The body literally begins to disintegrate. That's why there is the concept of the death zone, the space above 8,000 meters, where the chance of survival without oxygen is almost zero. Everest is also treacherous with its natural traps. Avalanches occur frequently and without warning. Snow accumulated on steep slopes suddenly collapses, sweeping away everything in their path. Even experienced climbers cannot predict when exactly this will happen. And then there are hurricanes, which can rise in minutes, obscuring their skies and turning the descent into a death trap. But along with danger, the mountain also holds beauty. Rivers are born on the slopes of Everest, which then feed millions of people in the valleys. Glaciers give rise to the great waterways of Asia, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Yangtze. In a sense, Everest and the entire Himalaya system are the world's water tower, a source without which civilizations could not exist. It's also interesting that Everest is changing its appearance. Glaciers are melting, new cliffs are being revealed, routes are shifting. Scientists are recording that climate change is increasingly affecting the Himalayas. Where only a few decades ago there was dense ice, today stone is emerging. And although the mountain remains majestic, its face is gradually changing. To a person looking at Everest from below, it appears motionless, eternal. But in reality, it is a living system. Glaciers move, cliffs collapse, snow falls and melts every year. The mountain breathes with its own rhythm, unlike humanity. Perhaps this is why Everest is so captivating. It's not just a record-breaking mountain. It's an entire world with its own laws, dangers, and beauty. A world in which man remains a guest, and nature always remains the host. Chapter 4. The First Conquerors and the History of Expeditions. Today, the summit of Everest seems accessible, reached by hundreds of people every year. But at the beginning of the 20th century, it remained an unknown mystery. The mountain rose above the clouds, and no one in the world knew whether it was even possible for a human being to reach its summit and return alive. In 1921, the British organized the first reconnaissance expedition. Their goal was not to conquer the summit, but at least to find a way to it. At that time, Tibet was a closed country. Nepal was also reluctant to allow foreigners in. Getting there was a true challenge. Long weeks of travel, yak caravans, river crossings and passes. This expedition was the first to describe the northern face of the mountain. They saw glaciers and cliffs and discovered a route that dozens of climbers would later attempt. They reached an altitude of approximately 7,000 meters and realized that a nearly impassable wall lay ahead. 2 years later, a new expedition set out. Among its members was George Mallory, the man who became the symbol of the early attempts to conquer Everest. When a journalist asked, "Why are you going there?" he replied with a phrase that went down in history because he was there. These words became the motto of an entire generation of climbers. In 1924, Mallory and his partner, Andrew Irvine, made their final attempt. They were last seen above 8,000 meters, not far from the summit. Then clouds covered the slope, and the climbers disappeared. Whether they were the first to reach the summit remained a mystery. For Britain and the world, it was a tragedy. Newspapers wrote about the tragedy, but at the same time, they created an image of heroes who died trying to achieve the impossible. 75 years later, in 1999, an expedition found Mallory's body. It was lying in the snow at an altitude of over 8,000 meters. His clothes, tools, even ropes were preserved, as if time had frozen. But the main question remains unanswered. Did he reach the summit or perish just short of it? Irvine's body has never been found. This mystery makes Mallory's story a legend, like a novel about a hero who vanished into the clouds. Only almost 30 years after the tragedy of Mallory and Irvine did a man officially reach the summit. On May 29, 1953, New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first to reach the summit and return alive. Their ascent became the event of the century. The news that a man had conquered the highest mountain on earth spread around the world and became a symbol of the triumph of will and perseverance. The expedition Hillary and Norgay participated in was enormous. It consisted of over 400 people, including rapists and guides. For months, they forged a path through the icefall to Khumbu, building camp after camp, hoisting loads to altitudes where every step required superhuman effort. Hillary and Norgay were the main attack team. They walked along the steep cliffs of the South Col, scrambling up narrow ridges where any false step meant a fall into the abyss. They spent only about 15 minutes at the summit. Edmund Hillary took several photos of Tenzing holding an ice axe with flags, but he himself was not included. Tenzing didn't know how to use a camera. When they returned to camp, the first thing Hillary said was, "We've conquered this thing." This simple phrase became a symbol of how a person could overcome the impossible. After this success, Everest ceased to be a mystery and became a challenge. New expeditions followed. In the 1960s, climbers from China, India, and Japan began to reach the summit. Each country wanted to write its name in history. In 1965, an Indian expedition reached the summit. The American expedition had reached it in 1963. The Chinese claimed to have done it even earlier, but the evidence remained murky for a long time. Everest gradually became an arena for records. The first women, the first ascents without oxygen, the first winter expeditions. In 1980, a Polish team made the first successful winter ascent. It was further proof that the boundaries of the possible can be expanded. And yet, it is the era of the first climbers that will forever remain etched in our memory. Back then, there was no modern technology, no lightweight tents, no satellite communications. People climbed in woolen clothes, heavy boots, carrying oxygen tanks heavier than the climbers themselves could bear. They climbed almost blind, without precise forecasts or detailed maps. And yet, it was they who opened the way to the summit, which has now become a symbol of a dream for the entire world. Today, when queues and hundreds of climbers can be seen at the summit, the story of those first expeditions resonates especially powerfully. These people went where there were no routes, where every step was a step into the unknown. They proved that the summit is attainable, and gave humanity a new symbol, a mountain that became the embodiment of courage and striving for the impossible. Chapter 5. The Death Zone and the Tragedies of Everest. There is a place where Everest ceases to be a majestic symbol and becomes a true enemy. Mountaineers call it the Death Zone. Anything above 8,000 meters is considered a territory where the human body can no longer survive for long. There is too little oxygen, the wind is too cold, the conditions are too harsh. At this altitude, the air is so thin that each breath contains only half the oxygen a person receives at sea level. The heart beats faster, the lungs work to the limit, the brain suffers from lack of nutrition, the body slowly dies, and all that remains for the climber is a race against time. Every extra hour there brings one closer to death. Temperatures in the death zone can drop below -40 degrees Celsius. Winds often reach speeds of over 100 kilometers per hour. In such conditions, any waiting becomes torture. And yet, it is there, at the very edge of human ability, that queues of dozens of people form. They stand and wait to reach the summit. It is one of the most paradoxical and terrifying images of modern Everest. The mountain holds hundreds of bodies. Many of those who never return from their ascent remain on its slopes. The icy cold preserves them for decades. Some have become grim landmarks for future expeditions. The most famous example is the climber with green boots. His body lay by the trail for almost 20 years, and everyone who climbed the northern route passed by. Another tragic story involves the German climber Hannelore Schmatz. In 1979, she reached the summit, but on the descent, her strength failed her. At 8,300 meters, she sat down in the snow and asked for water. A few minutes later, she died. For many years, her body sat on the slope, her eyes open and her hair fluttering in the wind. Many climbers passing by said that her gaze was unforgettable. Only 2 decades later did the wind carry her remains down. In 1996, Everest became the scene of one of the worst tragedies in the history of mountaineering. A violent storm caught several groups at an altitude of over 8,000 meters. They became lost, froze to death, and died just a few hundred meters from rescue camps. 8 climbers died. This story became the basis for John Krakauer's book In Thin Air, and a film that reminded the world of the price of sometimes achieving a dream. It is estimated that since the first expeditions to Everest, more than 340 people have died. And these are only those whose names are known. Many porters who worked during the first British expeditions disappeared forever in avalanches and were not listed. Every ascent carries risk, and even the most experienced climbers may not return. The causes of tragedies vary. Avalanches are the most common. They have claimed the lives of more than 170 people. Falls into crevasses and cliffs are second. There have been more than 70 such cases. Altitude sickness is the third cause. Oxygen deprivation. It has killed at least 3 climbers. Other factors can also play a role: freezing, exhaustion, organizational errors. At such an altitude, any small detail can be fatal. What's especially terrifying is that rescuing the dead is almost impossible. To bring a body down from 8,000 meters, a team of 12 people and dozens of oxygen tanks are needed. Oxygen alone costs tens of thousands of dollars. Even if the money is available, the risk for rescuers is too great. Therefore, bodies often remain where people died. In recent years, Nepalese authorities have launched cleanup campaigns. Several times, climbers' bodies have been brought down from the mountain, but it's impossible to do so with all of them. In 2019, 4 bodies were removed. In 2024, 5 more. But considering that hundreds of dead lie on the slopes, this work seems endless. And yet, people continue to climb. Every year, hundreds of climbers try to rise above the clouds. They know stories of tragedy, but the dream of the summit proves stronger than their fear. And there is something truly human in this. The desire to test the limit, to touch the sky, even if the path to it is fraught with danger. The death zone remains the most terrifying test for those who dare to climb. There, a person feels that they are no longer the master of their destiny. There, nature dictates the rules. There, every breath can be their last. But it is precisely in this zone that the most powerful stories of courage and sacrifice are born, of how a person goes to meet the impossible. Chapter 6. Everest's rivals are other titans of the world. Everest is the highest mountain on Earth. But height isn't the only criterion by which mountains become legends. There are peaks more dangerous, more treacherous, more sacred. Some have claimed more lives than Everest, others are shrouded in myth. Still others have become symbols of entire countries and continents. To understand why Everest has become a legend, one must also look at its rivals, the titan standing alongside it. When talking about the second highest peak in the world, Mount K2 is always mentioned. It is located in the Karakoram Range on the border of Pakistan and China. Its height is 8,611 meters. This is only 238 meters lower than Everest, yet K2 is nicknamed the Wild Mountain. Mountaineers call it the most difficult and treacherous peak on the planet. K2's slopes are steeper than those of Everest. There are no convenient plateaus to set up camp. The weather in the Karakoram is even more unpredictable. Winds and snowstorms rise suddenly, and windows of good weather last only a few days. The statistics are terrifying. 1 in 4 climbers attempting to conquer K2 has died. By comparison, Everest has a much lower mortality rate, leading to a saying among climbers: Everest for glory, K2 for the soul. Equally mysterious is Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world, at 8,586 meters, lies on the border between Nepal and India, and is sacred to locals. It is believed that deities guarding this land dwell at the summit. The first climbers to reach the summit in the mid-20th century deliberately stopped just below the highest point to respect local traditions. And to this day, many climbers repeat this gesture, retreating a few steps to the gods. Lhotse is another giant next to Everest. It stands at 8,516 meters, 27,516 feet. It stands literally at the foot of Everest, and many climbers see it during their ascent. Lhotse is dangerous with its ice walls and enormous crevasses. More than 100 people have died on its slopes, and it is considered one of the most technically difficult mountains. Makalu is another neighbor of Everest. At 8,485 meters, 27,516 feet, it is the 5th highest peak in the world. It is recognized by its pyramidal shape, reminiscent of a massive ice fortress. Makalu was long considered inaccessible, and it was only in 1955 that a French expedition first reached its summit. Nanga Parbat in Pakistan bears the ominous nickname, Killer Mountain. Its height is 8,125 meters, 26,515 feet. This mountain is notorious for its tragedies. In the first decades of climbing attempts, more than 30 climbers died, and only later was it finally conquered. Even today, Nanga Parbat is considered one of the most dangerous peaks on the planet. But perhaps the most terrifying mountain in the world is Annapurna. At 8,091 meters, it ranks third among the world's highest mountains, but it holds the sad record for the highest fatality rate. 1 in 3 climbers who attempted to climb Annapurna died. The slopes of this mountain are full of icefalls and cirque, giant ice towers that collapse without warning. The weather here changes rapidly, making rescue in the event of an accident almost impossible. This is why Annapurna is called the most deadly mountain on the planet. Interestingly, each of these peaks retains its own unique aura. Everest is a symbol of glory. K2 is a symbol of risk. Kanchenjunga is a symbol of sanctity. Lhotse and Makalu are symbols of inaccessibility. Nanga Parbat and Annapurna are symbols of tragedy. But it's not only the Himalayas and Karakoram that have given the world great peaks. Mount Elbrus, the highest peak in Europe, rises in the Caucasus. It is also sacred to many Caucasian peoples. Legends say that Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, was chained to Elbrus. Today, Elbrus has become a popular mountain for climbing, but its glaciers and avalanches remain dangerous. In South America, they consider Aconcagua, at 6,961 meters, 22,500 feet, the highest point on both American continents, and often called the American Everest. Although technically easier to climb, its altitude and harsh climate make Aconcagua a serious challenge. In Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro, at 5,895 meters, 18,500 feet, rises. This glacier-covered peak stands amidst the savanna, like a frozen island in the tropics. It is the continent's highest mountain, and one of the most beautiful in the world. Its silhouette has inspired writers and travelers from Hemingway to hundreds of modern romantics. In North America, the main peak is Mount Denali, formerly known as Mount McKinley. Its height is 6,190 meters. It is considered comparable in climate severity to the 8,000ers. It is extremely cold here, with raging winds even in summer, and climbing it is no easier than in the Himalayas. And finally, in Antarctica rises Mount Vinson, 4,892 meters. It stands in the coldest and most desolate place on the planet. Reaching it is more difficult than many 8,000ers. And so, Vinson has also become a symbol of strength and endurance. Looking at all these peaks together, it becomes clear. Everest is only one of the titans. It is the highest, but not always the most dangerous. K2, and she is purple, more terrifying. Kanchenjunga is sacred. Elbrus and Kilimanjaro are closer to the hearts of entire nations. Each peak has its own character, its own history, its own legends. For climbers, they are different gateways to a world of challenges. Some climb Everest for glory, others choose K2 to test their limits. Some approach Annapurna, knowing its deadly reputation. And some believe that the sacred demise offers no less a revelation than Everest. And perhaps this is precisely the secret of mountains. They are not alike. Each peak is a world unto itself. And if Everest has become a symbol for all humanity, its rivals remain guardians of other values: courage, faith, spirit, and memory. Chapter 7. Everest today. Commerce and technology. Everest has always beckoned daredevils, but these days the mountain has become not only a symbol of dreams, but also a huge industry. Today, the summit is not only about snow, ice, and wind. It is also a business involving millions of dollars. Every climber who wants to climb Everest must obtain an official permit. In Nepal, it costs between $10,000 and $20,000. This is just the ticket to the mountain, the entrance pass. Then comes the cost of equipment, transportation, oxygen tanks, food, tents, and guides. The final cost easily reaches $60,000 or $70,000, and sometimes even $200,000. Converted to the equivalent of an apartment or several cars, this is the price of an apartment or several cars. And all for a few minutes at the summit. For Nepal, Everest has become a source of income comparable to a gold mine. Hundreds of permits are issued annually, and tens of millions of dollars are added to the country's coffers. But this money isn't just earned by the government. Hundreds of Sherpas and guides work as guides. They haul loads, pitch tents, and lead climbers through icefalls. Without their help, the vast majority of foreigners would never reach the summit. Sherpas are a different story. For them, Everest isn't a romantic experience, but a work and a tradition. Many spend 20 or even 30 seasons on the mountain. There are legendary guides who have reached the summit more than 30 times. By comparison, most foreign climbers dream of at least one successful ascent. Commercialization has brought its own records. The summit has been conquered by the youngest climbers, 14-year-olds, and the oldest people over 80. There have been cases of more than 300 people standing on the summit simultaneously. This turned the narrow trail into a veritable mountain highway. But with commerce came new problems. The main one is trash. Every season, tons of waste, tents, oxygen cylinders, and food packaging are left on the slopes. Even human waste is preserved in the permafrost and does not decompose for years. Nepalese authorities have launched special cleanup campaigns on the mountain. Several years ago, expeditions brought down tens of tons of trash and even the bodies of dead climbers. But the mountain remains overloaded. Modern technology is gradually changing this picture. Today, drones are used to deliver cargo. In 2024, the first experiment was conducted. A drone flew from base camp to an altitude of over 6,000 meters, delivered oxygen cylinders, and returned with waste. This could be revolutionary. In the future, drones may assist not only in supplying supplies, but also in rescuing people and even evacuating bodies from the death zone. Equipment has also changed. While in the 1950s, climbers climbed to the summit in woolen clothes and heavy boots, today they use lightweight suits made of high-tech materials, satellite communications, navigation, and health monitors. Many carry cameras, and the internet is literally filled with photos from the summit. Everest has become not only a symbol of heroism, but also a part of visual culture. But despite all the technological advances, the mountain remains dangerous. In 2023, Everest broke a sad record. In a single season, 17 people died there. This is the highest death toll in recorded history. This is due both to a record number of permits issued and to the changing climate. The weather at the summit is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Commercialization has also given rise to a new phenomenon: tourists at the summit. Increasingly, people without serious training are climbing. They rely on guides and oxygen, but often don't fully appreciate the danger. This creates tension on the routes, and that's why queues in the death zone become death traps. Everest today is a mixture of ancient symbol and modern business. On the one hand, it's still the same peak that beckons dreamers. On the other, it's a huge industry where every minute and every step is valued in dollars. And perhaps it is precisely this paradox that makes the mountain such a vibrant symbol of our time. It remains a dream, a commodity, a challenge, and a brand. Chapter 8. Everest and the Future. Everest seems eternal. Its white slopes disappear into the clouds, and it seems as if nothing can change this peak. But the mountain's future is far from serene. Already today, scientists and climbers notice that Everest is changing. And the question is what it will become in the coming decades. The first thing that worries researchers is the climate. The Himalayas are called the Earth's third pole. They contain enormous reserves of fresh water in glaciers. Everest and its neighbors are the source of rivers that feed millions of people in Asia. But due to global warming, the glaciers are melting rapidly. Scientists have recorded that the ice thickness has decreased by tens of meters in recent decades. The Khumbu Icefall, through which all climbers pass, is moving faster than before and is becoming increasingly dangerous. If this process continues, the future of the region will be at risk. Another problem is garbage. Over the years of commercial expeditions, the mountain has turned into a kind of waste museum. On the slopes lie thousands of oxygen cylinders, kilometers of ropes, torn tents, food packaging, and even human waste, which does not decompose for decades in the permafrost. Several years ago, Nepalese authorities launched special cleanup campaigns, and in one season, they managed to remove tens of tons of waste, but the mountain remains overloaded. Many climbers joke bitterly, Everest is the highest garbage dump in the world. There's also a third threat, route congestion. Hundreds of permits are issued each season. Queues on narrow slopes have become a common sight. Sometimes dozens of people stand in the death zone, where every minute is fatal. This is alarming to experts. Too many inexperienced people are venturing into areas where there's no margin for error. The future of Everest depends on whether people can find a balance between their dreams and their reason. New technologies have been emerging in recent years. Drones have already been tested for cargo delivery. Perhaps in the future, they will assist in evacuating people and even in rescue operations. Modern materials make equipment lighter and more reliable. Satellite communications and health sensors help monitor climbers' health in real time. All of this makes climbing safer. But the main problem isn't the technology, but the number of people willing to risk it for a few minutes at the summit. Nepalese authorities are discussing limiting the number of permits and tightening climber training requirements. There are suggestions of introducing a minimum climbing experience requirement before attempting Everest. But such measures are difficult to implement, as the mountain brings the country millions of dollars annually. For many in the region, mountaineering is a job and a means of survival. Climate change adds new threats. Melting ice is revealing the bodies of dead climbers, hidden for decades under snow. For many, this is a harrowing sight. The mountain seems to remind, it preserves the memory of all who have tried to conquer it. And yet, despite all the difficulties, Everest continues to beckon. It remains a symbol that never loses its power. For some, it's a challenge. For others, a spiritual test. For others, prestige and proof of success. But for all, it remains a peak that makes people dream. Perhaps the future of Everest will be less about breaking records than about the search for harmony. People will climb not for photos and fame, but for respect for the mountain and for themselves. Perhaps one day, mountaineering will no longer be mass tourism, but will return to the spirit of achievement and exploration. Everest is a mirror of humanity. It reflects our dreams, our weaknesses, our thirst for glory, and our willingness to take risks. What this mirror will look like in 10, 20, or 50 years depends on us. But one thing is certain, as long as people look at the white peak, lost in the clouds, they will want to climb it. And so, our journey has come to an end. We've climbed the paths of history and legend, heard tales of tragedy and victory, looked at Everest's rivals, and glimpsed its future. Now it's time to leave the mountains in silence, covered in snow and wind, and allow yourself to rest. Close your eyes and imagine the summit hidden in the clouds. Let the cold winds remain distant, and let only peace come to you. You've already traveled this path in your imagination, and now it's time to rest. Good night. May your dreams be light and bright, like the clouds over the Himalayas. May they bring you peace and strength for a new day. Good night, and sweet dreams.